Hello and welcome everybody. It is the 10th of March and today in our Facebook Live, I am joined by a very special guest, Charlotte Schaefer. Welcome.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for having me.
We've got a great topic today all about probate genealogy. Before we dive into that, I would like to just cover a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, you might have seen at the end of this month, we have the STEP annual conference coming up. So if you are attending that conference, there is the gala dinner on the Monday evening, and the Art of Estate Planning is hosting a few tables. So there's a Facebook event within our Facebook group where you can put your name down for an expression of interest if you want to join us on the table, and you can also see who's going. So this is probably one of the first times that the Art of Estate Planning members have been able to get together in person. So I really do want to do my best to try to facilitate that so we can meet each other. So yeah, find that event. If you're not sure, just ask me a question. I can tag you in it. But that'll be the place where I'll be posting the details about catching up and coordinating those tables. I do also, before we begin, just want to do an acknowledgement that today I'm hosting this training from the lands of the Yugambeh people, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living, learning, and working from today as well. So I can see that we've got a few people joined, so I'll get the housekeeping stuff finished. I'm delighted to have Charlotte join us today. Charlotte is a lawyer who I have been watching for a long time. I really do find the areas that you get involved in, Charlotte, in estate planning absolutely fascinating. So for those of you who don't know, Charlotte is an estate planning lawyer in Sydney, but she has also done the death doula training and is focusing on probate genealogy. I can't even say it, probate genealogy services, which she has come to talk to us about today. So I really don't think there's that many estate planning lawyers who have the experience and expertise that you do, Charlotte. So I'm very delighted that you have given up your time today to join us to share what you know about probate genealogy. Before we dive into your presentation, Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about your practice and where you're based and the types of clients that you work with?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tara. So I'm based in DY, Sydney's Northern Beaches, scene of a lot of flood water this week. So yeah, and I have a bit of a mixed practice. So I do estate planning and estate administration, but I sort of came into that off the back of being a professional genealogist in this space. And so, yeah, did my qualifications and came to be really interested in that sort of nexus between genealogy and law, which really comes up a lot in estate work. So that's kind of, so I do work for private clients, obviously in estate planning and administration, but I also have trustee clients and private practitioner clients who are dealing with proof issues in their estate administration matters.
So did you become a genealogist first or a lawyer first?
Lawyer first.
Lawyer first, yeah.
But I was in like commercial litigation and, mortgage enforcement in my first iteration, and then had a career change and moved into genealogy, and then sort of circled back to the law kind of that way as it happens. So yeah, a few different hats on the journey, but yeah, lawyer for since 2000 I was admitted. So yeah.
Okay, I love that. Especially, I think there's a lot of people in this group who have explored different ways of being a lawyer, despite that, sort of traditional path, which sounds like you started on, same as me, and then, found another way. So I absolutely love hearing that story. I think this topic is fascinating. We really have never covered it in an educational sense before. So I'm absolutely delighted to hear what you have to say. Charlotte has put together a presentation for us. So I think now's the perfect time for me to hand over to Charlotte and we can watch her presentation. All yours, Charlotte.
Okay, thanks, Tara. All right, so for everyone who's watching, this this does have a bit of a New South Wales centric bias, I suppose, but a lot of it is has its equivalents in the other states and territories. So don't switch off for that reason. And the other thing I'd say is like this genealogy is not brain surgery. It's not like complex law. It can muck with your head a little bit, but anyone can do it. But it's just a matter that if you're doing it a lot, you can get more efficient at it. And if you are time poor, then you may not have that capacity and luxury to sort of be, chasing down these rabbit holes and, maintaining the subscriptions that you might consider getting. So, all right. So we'll start with looking at the question, what is probate genealogy? So it's genealogy for proof purposes. So probate, proof purposes. It can come up in land matters. I have worked on a couple of matters where, historically a strip of land has been overlooked in a conveyance, or hasn't been, the transfer wasn't registered properly. So we needed to trace the descendants of the registered proprietors. But very often it comes up in our estate administration work. It's a strategy to locate missing beneficiaries. So there's definitely a decent overlap here with commercial agents that will do this work. So, they'll offer skip tracing services, which can be, terrific. Genies like me will come at it with, skip tracing capability, but also they'll go back in time a little bit. So I don't know if anyone in watching knows like what a slide rule is. It's like more of older generational thing. People do maths in the 1950s, but it's like a ruler with a thing on it that's kind of slides along, and that's kind of what comes to mind when I think about how we working the information. We've got kind of sliding along the passage of time and dropping pins on factual certainty, and then moving it through back into the present time to sort of trace somebody. So that's where genies can differ from skip tracing commercial agents. And of course, it is the method to prove your intestate estate entitlements, and also identify who are your persons that are affected in an informal will application, or if you can't find the original will, you've just got a copy. So that might be, if there's no earlier will, then that's going to be a pseudo intestacy, or if there's an earlier will, then it might be a matter of looking for those beneficiaries in the earlier will. And then, of course, it comes up in certain court requisitions where there's some genealogical proof issues. So, look, the basics, entitlement is proved by certificate evidence, birth, marriage and death, and of course divorce records. An original certificate that you're going to get from the registry is in fact a certified copy of the entry in the register of births or marriages or deaths, as the case may be, that's made by the registrar. So you making a certified copy of that is actually a certified copy of the certified copy. So your birth marriage is prima facie evidence of birth and of parentage. And in New South Wales, you can get the birth certificate of the youngest child, which should record all the children of the relationship, and that can be evidence of all of their births, which is kind of interesting because since 2010, half-bloods and full-bloods, that distinction in siblings was done away with. So I find it a little bit problematic that they might accept that, but I think it might be the registry trying to, relieve that burden of cost that comes with getting all the certificates. But of course, it's not going to capture births outside that relationship, and that might constitute someone else who holds an entitlement. Marriage, of course, marriage and the date of the marriage, it's going to prove the name change for a female, and death is the death event and the date. So a medical certificate that you're going to get sort of straight after someone dies is not acceptable ordinarily in the court to prove death. So Yes, and then you've got the parentage searches. So in New South Wales, that's called the Section 50 search certificate. That's Section 50 of the Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Act. So that's that has some significance, because under the Section 92 subsection 3 of the Probate and Administration Act, that's going to protect your executor client or administrator client when you get that certificate for your intestate or your testator, as the case may be. So they're important sections to be aware of. But parentage searches or certificates are their equivalents in the other jurisdictions. Victoria is a bit of a headache, as some of you may know, with that. And of course, in New South Wales, that they're done on like 10-year increments. So it's like, it can be costly. And sometimes in some of the jobs that I'm doing, just the disbursements alone can be like between $2,000 and $3,000. And some clients, it's hard for them to get their head around that. So that's not my fees of doing it. That's just my out of pockets. But so I would just say to you, it remains the responsibility of the solicitor to assist their client to prove their entitlement, or to prove that the members of a class of beneficiaries, or their greatest interest to make the application, and that's not so that you've got to strike that balance, and you've got to kind of educate your client that that's the responsibility, and that's the risk they bear if they don't do that properly. And you're going to potentially come into problems anyway with the registry. Cross on evidence, Chapter 21 has some good insights here. And I see a question about the death certificate, not enough to prove death. Well, interestingly, in cross on evidence, Justice Hayden talks about statements from people, from a person who's ID'd the corpse, basically the body. And I know I've had matters where somebody's died overseas, like in Thailand actually, and we couldn't get the death certificate. He died intestate. So we were trying to work with the local police to get a statement from them that the court will accept a statement where somebody has made a body identification as proof of death. So that's a way of proving death. But have a look at that Chapter 21. The probate document in some jurisdictions, so Victoria, Queensland and Tasmania, that's according to Justice Hayden in cross on evidence, that's accepted as proof of death in those jurisdictions. But and of course I've got a matter in Victoria, or it's a New South Wales matter at the moment, but I got Victorian probate because I'm looking for the kids for this woman. I knew she died. So the probate record gave me their information, their full names and their addresses. And I was hoping it might contain the death certificate, but it didn't. But I thought if I talked to one of the boys, they might have it. And you can try and save money for your clients by kind of seeing if family members hold these records in their filing cabinets and whatnot, but they don't. So I have to get that death certificate anyway because it's a New South Wales matter. But it's good to know that probate can potentially do the job as well. But anyway, that's all kind of academic because you've got to get to first base to get your grant, and court requisitions can stand in the way of that. Now, for private applicants, you need to prove greatest interest to be the appropriate applicant for the court. And so you effectively have to establish entitlements to show that. And I just want to just touch on this slide here, which kind of outlines this kind of funny period between date of death and the date of the grant, where it's vesting in the public trustee, and I'm sure this is the case in most jurisdictions. It is in Victoria and Queensland as well. Don't know the sections off the top of my head, but there's a vesting clause, and then the grant will retrospectively vest the property of the deceased in that appointed administrator or executor. So, yeah, it's a tricky one because you're in a bit of a catch-22 if you're acting for an applicant administrator, you've got no ostensible authority at that point to get the documents, the certificates that might prove your authority. Now, the BDM, the Birth, Deaths and Marriages Access policies, provide that estate matters like this are exceptions to the restrictions that are otherwise applying to birth, death and marriage certificates. So but it's important to bear this in mind, because the public trustees, and certainly in New South Wales, are entitled as of right to the grant. So they don't have to provide certificate evidence when they make their applications. And you will often see suggestions from the registrar to refer the matter to the trustee. That's not personal. That's because they're having regard to the burden of proof issues they can see in your application. And they know that the trustee is in a unique position of not having to prove their right to get the grant. It's automatically a right that's available to them. So it's really important that private practitioners have a good handle on this, because there are certainly cases where the evidentiary issues are so great they can't be overcome, and the only way the matter is going to progress is in fact through the public trustee. So you're better off getting your head around that and sort of getting it, gathering the evidence as best you can, preparing the application. But if you come to the point where you recognise that you've got some insurmountable issues, then don't keep wasting your clients' time and money. And you just need to explain to them the reality of the legislation and refer the matter. And of course, if you want an assessment of what you've got, then I can by all means help you. Okay, so common requisitions are going to be relating to your client's standing to apply, and getting the consents from affected persons, and you need to find people to get the consents from them. If you can't find them, you can't get the consent. And your only options are an administration bond from your applicant who has two sureties that are to the value of the beneficiary share. That's rare. I think in my experience, most people can't sort of get that together, so they can't overcome that requirement. And that's really not feasible when you can't actually crystallise the value of the missing person has in the estate. So I've had a matter where the father of the deceased had no father on his birth certificate, so the paternal grandfather was unknown. So that whole side of the family was unknown. It was entitlement through to cousins. And so you couldn't even crystallise the value of what the missing shares might be. Okay, and so I know we want to rip into the genealogy stuff, so I'm just going quickly through this. Your trustee legislations do provide the pathways for dealing with uncertainty, but they are only available once you've got the grant. Okay, so that's why I kind of did want to touch on that issue of getting to first base.
And Charlotte, I will just say, I do think this is really interesting because it just shows how much bureaucracy you have to navigate, and like the depth of experience that you have in dealing with this compared to someone sort of dabbling. I can just see how much value you bring from knowing, potential challenges or, backdoor ways. So I do think don't feel like you have to rush this part.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because you do. It's hard because I had some time at the trustee and guardian working there, and you did see several or many examples where you could see solicitors didn't get it, and by the time they come to the trustee, the clients are frustrated because they've already spent years and on what was actually when it was being looked at the trustee, they were never going to get the grant. So so it's just important to have a handle on that. Give it a best crack, and I'm here to help you keep that work. But it's also about just knowing when to give up the fight, I think, too. And I can help you kind of work with your clients to explain that. All right. So yeah, here the court applications are you can apply to the court for Benjamin style orders and next of kin inquiries. So they will protect your client because the court's going to make orders for distribution, and even though a missing beneficiary who might emerge later does have rights, they're not going to be as against your executive client or administrative client. But like I said, we've got to get to first base. So if you have got to first base and you have a problem and evidentiary uncertainty issue, then what do you have to do before you can go to court and bring a case? And so there's a couple of cases that really speak to that, and it's really just I talk in the language of exhausting all efforts, and that's picking up the language in cases like this one where Justice Hallen speaks about no reasonable further inquiries could have been made that can improve the state of the evidence. So you've really got to have done all the work before you are going to be seeking orders from the court. You don't want to be sent away to do more work and waste the court's time. This is another case where that they've been looking for this bloke for nearly 20 years. The plaintiffs were old guys, and yes, so that the judge considered that exhausted all reasonable and responsible attempts to locate the deceased relative. And that case is interesting because it does reference the size of the estate. There's only so much money to play with to do the job and to identify and trace people. So there is arguably a correlation between efforts and the value of the estate, and that makes sense, right? Because of the risk. All right, so researching. Okay, so like I said, I'm all about building your capacity to do this work. Here we go. All right, so but if you do need a professional to assess your evidence, then from a court requisition or whatever, then by all means keep me in mind. I'm often now doing like affidavits of genealogy that deal with the whole entitlement question separately in an affidavit. I've lost my.
I'll just take that off while you get it back up, Charlotte. And while you're finding that, so I just want to confirm you're happy to be in the background acting or help supporting law firms with the particular part of the process while they keep the client. Is that something you're open to doing?
Yeah. So I'm just like in the background as a sort of a service provider. Hang on, where was that to? I'm just the genealogist that's doing the proof work. And then the primary applicant's affidavit can just reference my affidavit as the in terms of outlining their right to make the application, and the entitlements generally. So I'm just coming in as a behind the scenes with the solicitor. I'm not.
You're getting some testimonials. That's from Rosemary. Saying that you really helped her. And Marley is saying that she just wished she knew about your service. So I can see how I know for me, I really never had to do anything like this. So I would just take me 10 times longer to do. And then I'd be sitting there going, what can I charge? What can I really record time for? What's me learning?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And it can be a bit of a time killer. All right, so let's get into it. So these are kind of my little pearls of wisdom for you. So you start with what you know and move from there. So rather than kind of shots in the dark, bull in a china shop, every now and then you might have to do that, but start with what you know. And if it's just the death certificate, what's it telling you? Small details matter. So So if someone says, oh, Jimmy, yeah, he went to New Zealand, back in the 70s, I mean, that's gold. You've just saved yourself a lot of time looking around Australia for Jimmy. My experience is those stories or those little leads are mostly not made up. Like there's something in there that's worth looking into. You've got to go back in time to come forward. So that's that slide rule thing. And you're dropping a pin on stuff facts you can know. They were in French's Forest in 1980 and then you're moving forward. Know how to interrogate sources and why. So, I know Ancestry, like most of you might have heard of Ancestry. So, if you want to be doing this work yourself, you want a subscription to Ancestry, the full subscription I would recommend. And, if you're looking for the death of a female, you can put the surname of the father, there's a field there, leave her name blank because who knows who she married. And, you might get a hit that way. So it's all about how to kind of work the data sets, databases. And a negative result is a result. So yeah, that's the thing. It's not a failure. It's a right. We can put a line through that person. And the process of elimination is sometimes a necessary way of cutting people out of the contention. All right. So yeah. So with genealogy, probate genealogy, we're talking about when, and that passage of time can go all the way back to the 1800s. The blue dots are so the one near 1950 there, that's a potential, birth year for an intestate deceased now, their birth year. Then the next blue dots are the birth years of the parents and then the grandparents. So yeah, if there's no siblings and, you're not going sideways and down, you're going up and then back down to aunts and uncles and cousins, then yeah, you're going to be digging up stuff in the past. Where are they? Where have they spent their life? Especially the periods of time when they were fertile, to put it like that, like could have had children. Because, if we're looking for kids and we're doing searches, then we need those windows, locked down and then do our searches. And, and of course, who are we looking for? So, my process is one where, I'm using a lot of secondary material that's informing where are the certificates going to be. So if I'm, working with the secondary evidence and it shows me, oh, that person died in, WA, that's, I don't need to be doing big death search requests in the New South Wales registry when I've got a cemetery hit in WA. No one knew that they went there, but there they are, and there's the death, and I've got a date of death, and I can just go straight there and get my death certificate. So it's really all about doing it as cost effectively as you can. You want the primary certificate evidence, but you need the secondary material to inform that. I just had a matter where it's an intestate deceased, where we couldn't, the father was fully estranged, and the family hadn't heard from him for 40 years. Kind of an unusual name, and he was sort of an alcoholic, but I found this in Ancestry. I found it sort of a cemetery record. It was very bare, but I had to get that death certificate to know is this the guy. And I am, he was really the only contender. The birth year, obviously applying the age that's recorded on the death certificate corresponds to his birth year. So that, together with some other evidence, I'm going to be putting in that affidavit to make the case that this guy is the father of the deceased. Even though that death certificate is full of unknowns, but that also speaks to the fact that the informant didn't know anything. This man was certainly estranged from his family because no one knew anything. It was some friend or I can't actually remember, but not someone who knew anything about this guy. All right, so here's the slide where you've got all the records and things that you might want to be looking at. Death events are always illuminating and they leave lots of footprints that you can, look at that will give you some insights. The subscription databases like Ancestry. There's the Mormon database too, Family Search, which is free. So that's got quite a few Australian records on it, land court records, immigration, naturalisation records. I'll come back to that. Historic electoral rolls are just an absolute must. And obviously your birth, death and marriage online, the free indexes are a regular thing. Social media. So, that's obviously something you want to look at. You're trying to build, you can get family members from there. And a strategy that I'll often use if you just can't find the person is find someone who you can see on social media is in touch with them, like he's a mate or something. They've liked something. And you can't find the person, find someone you can kind of see is near to them and who might be able to put you in touch with them. Digitized newspapers are fantastic as well, although they are more, Trove, for example. Some of you might know Trove. That's the National Library's digitized newspapers. It's an amazing place to get lost in, but it's kind of more through to the 50s and 60s. Sydney Morning Herald Archives. But even if you can see a death notice has been published, you can potentially inquire in the local newspaper to get a copy, or engage an agent, or get me to go into the library where all the microfilms are to pull it up. Freedom of information applications can be made for the deceased, not for people in the line of entitlement or missing bennies, but for the deceased to get a date of birth, Centrelink records, and Department of Home Affairs. So that's kind of from the 1990s, immigrants coming in. It's just slow. That's the only thing. This whole process can be painfully slow. All right.
And Charlotte, I might just mention, because we've had Sasha saying, as a non-lawyer, she's super interested in the genealogy aspect. And so Charlotte has kindly volunteered to share a list of resources, tools, I don't know what you describe it, of places to look. So that will be coming in the next few days, which you might find really interesting, Sasha.
For sure. And that's interesting. So Sasha's doing the Ancestry. So I've got on Ancestry, and I'd encourage solicitors that are doing estate admin work to set up a folder in their bookmarks bar, genealogy sites. If you do get an Ancestry subscription, I have permanent kind of just click straight to a general search. So all of the Ancestry data sets, the old electoral rolls, so they're 1903 to 1980 in Australia, and the public member trees. Now, and they, Sasha, you would know about them. So basically you do that pretty early on in the piece, because there's a chance, and it's happened often enough for me, that someone out there has already done the legwork and has, there's lots of people doing the family trees, and some of them are private, locked down, you can't see them, but there's plenty that are public. So you punch in like a death of a parent or a grandparent or something in the public member tree search, and then you might get a hit on that family tree. And then, it's not evidence, but it's just like someone's done all the legwork, and you get, all those siblings, and right, they died in Tasmania, and you can really save a lot of time. So they're the three quick links I've got set up with Ancestry. Okay, so free sites like Google. You can never underestimate the power of Google. Chuck a name into Google, just roll the dice. I mean, and when I say, don't do bull in a china shop, I do make an exception for Google, I think, with that. So, and, if you have a more common name, but they're associated with Dubbo or something like that, a place, they're just some insights about how you can interrogate Google to just draw out a hit. That could have been, the local bowling champion or whatever, and you might make a phone call to the bowling club to find out a bit more information. So you really got to hustle, but Google's fantastic, and you can reverse the name too, because sometimes that's how things are entered into databases, with the surname first. The Australian Electoral Commission, the AEC, so they've got a free search lookup for individuals to check that they are enrolled. So if you've got a person, they were somewhere 5-10 years ago and you're wondering if they're still there, we'll run that search. You do need their full names and the accurate address, but there's nothing lost there. And if you are confident that you've got the name correct and the address correct, then and you get a nil result, or a result that indicates no, they're not there, then that's a result. So you've got an information that they're no longer that address. That's progress, even though it might not feel like it. A Google search might hit the ABN lookups. A lot of small sole traders, that sort of thing, are going to have ABNs or cancelled ABNs, it's not much, but it'll give you a postcode, which can be useful. All right. So names, I guess, just quickly, we don't have 2021 census results yet, but obviously we're dealing with a lot of, people from that have immigrated. I mean, we've all immigrated at some point somewhere in the family tree, right? There's some insights into the percentage, unless we're Indigenous Australians, of course, but there's some insights about the percentage of overseas immigration in these current sort of generations that may present problems for your proof issues for your intestacies, especially. And I would recommend that you seek professional advice. I've got an international network that I tap into, and sometimes it's easier for solicitors to work with someone who knows what they need, rather than go directly overseas. But there's options there for you guys. But people coming in, like I mentioned, National Archives have the immigration records from through to about the 1990s. You can search online, and then after that, you're wanting to make a FOI request to Home Affairs. You wanting to drop the pin on the birth certificate, though, if you can. It's going to verify their name, the date, obviously, and their parentage. And look, I recently did a matter where, people just change their names. It's just hilarious. I'm sure you all have stories about this. So this case, I've changed the names here, but she's born Emma. She went by these three other names and married two guys, and then died Emma Allison. So, and we've got to remember that, like, the whole VOI thing that we do now, and, to get certificates, and all this sort of ID focus now, like, that wasn't the case 20, 30, 40 years ago. You could register your marriage with some kind of variation to the name on your birth certificate, or go with more of a, nickname or something like that. It's very common. So, so you've got to sort of start with the birth certificate, know what the variations are before you start ordering your parentage searches. If there are variations, and then the marriage variation, you want to take all that to the registry to get that certificate, so you've covered all those scenarios. Because if they're recorded as the parent on some other name, and then that person presents and has the DNA report, then you've got problems. Okay, so this was a recent example. Client, AKA, yes. Sorry, Tara, I'm just jumping into that question there.
I think it's just an anecdote to sort of say it happens all the time, rather than a question. But
sure,
it's a really interesting point you're making.
AKA all the way. It can be kind of annoying and messy, but you want to capture it all. So this was just one where the brief from a client was an intestacy, but they just wanted me to look for one person. So the aunt, Anne, and, last known to have gone to Canberra in the 60s. So I sort of probably should have said, look, we need to get the birth certificate, but that's expensive. It can be slower than the freely available certificates. So I thought, right, what can we do here? So I run the marriage search, no result. So I pulled the death notices for mum and dad, the parents. Noticed that she's referred to Anne without an E. Got mum's death certificate because she died after dad, so you're more chance of getting a child on the informant section for the second to die, and that's really useful for married daughters whose name and address is often there. But in this case, she'd gone to the Canberra, and so she wasn't the informant, but she's recorded as Barbara on the death certificate. So I was like, oh my God, who am I looking for? So come back to the marriage indexes, and there she is as Barbara, and then pick her up as with a married name in the electoral roll in Canberra, and with the spouse got his full name, and then pick her up in the death notices in the Ryerson index, which you need to know about. So it's an online index of death notices. I think, excuse me, I think WA is not really there, but most other states are, and that's going to be a great place to just pick up a date of death and a place of death. So there she is. She's died in the ACT under her married name. Death certificate ordered. Job done. But it does speak to how important that birth certificate is, because that would have told me straight away that's Barbara, not Anne at all. All right, so look, I'm just going to run through some questions and how you might answer them for yourself. So who are the relatives? You're looking for the death certificate, of course. That's going to be a timestamp on the age and living status of other relatives. Often you'll see, somebody's deceased. The informant I've spoken about. So the knowledge, other than the death event and the date of death, the other information is as good as the knowledge of the informant as to marriages and children. So very important. You can't be relying on the death certificate to feel confident that someone died without kids. Yes, and as I say, that it can be recorded under completely different names. So, Edward might die as Ted. Happens all the time. Marriage certificates will often have married sisters as witnesses. That's a little pearl there. I've talked about public memories on Ancestry. They're also, Google might also hit a name on other family genealogy pages that families have set up, which will often provide some great information. And the historic electoral rolls I've talked about, and I'll come back to that. So here's just some snips of publicly available indexes. So they're my grandparents at the top, marriage, and then my grandmother's death in New South Wales. So all freely searchable and available. It's my other grandmother's birth at the top, grandfather's, and then the marriage in the middle, and then her death. And you can see the parents referred in her birth and in her death. And so, again, that's sort of contributing to that cogent kind of feeling you want in the evidence. Yeah, this is the right person. And you can see I've got the middle name in the death certificate. I don't have. I've just got an initial in the birth certificate. But we can see that things are checking out in terms of the other points of reference for that person. Okay, so I just love historic electoral rolls. They're just a must-have. Where is your person over time? So it's going to give you their full names as appeared on the electoral roll, of course. Who are they with? Someone who's sharing the same surname will appear with them. Their address. So that's a really nice pin drop for you. And then they might drop off. And you can ask, well, why? Did they die? Did they remarry? Did they leave Australia? So there's some entries at the bottom I've extracted. That's my mother in 1972 with my father. 1977, different addresses, same surname. 1980, she's gone and father's living alone in Glebe. So I can go, right, what's happened there? Now, let's say I already had the marriage certificate. I could run a divorce search. I would, for not very much money in the federal court website, I'd get a hit. I'd get a confirmation the divorce had occurred. That's really good. Then I'd run another a marriage search that would be restricted, but still I should be able to access that. That's going to give me a new marriage, and you will then find her. She wasn't dead. I could have done a death search and I wouldn't have got anything. She was just under a new married name in 1980. So things can happen quickly that, you can be thinking, well, what are the possibilities here? And look, this is just my grandfather from late 1940s through to 1980 with various relatives. Both wives are appearing with him throughout the passage of this chapter, these entries. But the other thing is he did spend some time overseas. So if you're on notice that somebody has, been in another jurisdiction for a significant period of time, it might be incumbent on you to just check out whether a birth search is required, because it looks like he might have been in New South Wales this whole time, but if he actually wasn't. All right, so are they living? Your death certificates might refer to a widow. Obviously, that's going to help you bookend those time periods. So you can say, right, we died between 1980 and 1995 because she died a widow, so he died before her. And, you could just start to sort of zero in on his death a bit. Ryerson, I'm about to talk about that. That's your online death notices. We now have published probate notices, of course. I think it's been running in New South Wales since 2013. Queensland probate matters, they're searchable. I'll be looking there in the Queensland courts to see if there's been a probate for a person. And that's not only going to give me the deceased name, it's going to give me the applicant, who could be a child. And then, so then there's obviously the online BDM databases, but the Ancestry have a death index as well. So it's picking up the public online databases for the registries, but it's also pulling in all these other data sets, cemetery data sets from all over the place. So that's, if you just want to throw the net wide to see if you can get it, evidence of death. Like I said, that's how I found that father and could order his death certificate rather than do a big expensive death search. And like I said, your cemetery databases as well. So they're not all on Ancestry. So if you know, Southern Sydney, Warrenora, there's a lot of online substantial cemeteries search for loved one indexes. You might get a hit. If you do, you get a date of death, you get a full name. They might be buried with someone. And then all of a sudden, when he died and when, his wife died as well. So this is the Ryerson Index. The top extract is just the entry that you're going to see when you search that index. It's completely free. And then there's the extract. So like I said, like Sydney Morning Herald has an archive from 1955 to 1995 that I think it's a few hundred a year that you can have a subscription to. And then a lot of newspapers aren't online, but there are microfilms in the libraries and that sort of thing. So just go back to there. You can see here it's giving all sorts of information about the person, the deceased, his family, the second wife, all the kids. We don't know who the kids belong to yet, but yeah. And then that's my other grandfather. So this is good because you can see in the actual death notice itself, so it says loved father and father-in-law of Elizabeth and Colin. So all of a sudden you've got, you know, that the daughters, Elizabeth and Jennifer, have remarried or married, and you've got the first name of the husband anyway. So, you know, it's just all little bits that are building this picture. And just on the Ryerson index, so the death notice date is going to be the date of death. And you may find that there's just a funeral notice. So, yeah, in those cases, you're going to want to go a bit wider with your request for the death certificate because, you know, you don't quite know how long the intervening period might have been between death and the funeral. Usually, obviously, it's only a week or so, but sometimes longer. All right. So where were they born? So, you know, immigration records are going to give that insight. I mentioned Centrelink. These are just movement records, passenger lists, and, you know, this gives birth dates for, you know, all of those people, the grandfather, the wife, the 3 of the kids. And of course, birth details are the most restricted because of the incidence of fraud and so on, because all these people are living, right? So, yeah, that can be really hard because the last 100 years have locked it down. So, of course, we can go to the registry under our, you know, the exceptions as estate representatives, and often we might need to do that. But sometimes you can pick up the birth information. If there's a link to the Second World War, then the nominal roll will give you that as well. That's grandfather, that's grandmother. So birth, not just the date, but the jurisdiction as well. Marriage or name change. So marriage is going to be evidence of that. Deed poll, searches. If you formally change your name with the registry, then that should actually appear on your birth certificate. Another reason why you need to get the birth certificate often, because some people do, you can. I added a second middle name, long story, but I did. And so my birth certificate records that change. Yeah, that's just an important source of truth. Nicknames, social media, you'll get a bit of an insight from that. And I mentioned the informant on death certificates, you know, often the married daughter is the one that steps in, you know, to deal with those things, and that can be gold for us. Okay, yeah, that's just an engagement notice and a marriage record that's kind of given all sorts of useful information for the genealogist. And that's just an insight into all those things I've just kind of flicked over that are just pulled from the records. That's all without ordering anything, without ordering any certificates. So you can get a lot of information and then go to the registries and go boom, 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 boom. Here's everything I need.
Charlotte, I'll just let you know we've probably got about 5 minutes left before we wrap up.
Cool. Yeah, I'm nearly done. So this one, look, just speaks to the fact that, yeah, if you know somebody's moved around the place, they might have had children, and this was just a case where, you know, if you just done the Section 50 search certificate for him, he was a truck driver, drove around, had different families, no one knew about the other family, and you just did the Section 50 search certificate, yeah, you'd be in trouble in a sense if the kids later joined the dots. They didn't know at the time, but yeah, you just got to think about where has the person spent the time and where might have they procreated. And look, yeah, just classes of beneficiaries. So this was just a case where, yeah, to those of my grandchildren who survived me. So testate matters where you're dealing with that, or you're dealing with, you know, all my children, you know, generic kind of statements like that. So that's an exercise in proof of entitlement. And in this case, this was an unfortunate one because that everybody was estranged from everybody else. And that's often the case where you need help because no one knows anything, no one's in touch, everyone hates each other. So I found the son and he established he he had a daughter, one grandchild, couldn't find the daughter to establish if she'd had a child. So I ended up doing a search with the South Australian Registry, actually, which came back nil for children, but she had a kid and she had it in South Australia, and I gave them the birth date and everything. So, yeah, you just got to be careful. And, of course, the registries aren't going to take responsibility if there's an error on their part. So just, be alive to that. And that's a really good case just to have a look at for classes of beneficiaries, and the court trying to make sure that the trust doesn't fail because it's just a crazy clause. That one was the issue of the deceased grandparents, and I think it was like 1,600 beneficiaries or something. It was out of control. So they had to sort of call it, but that's a good case. Now, like, this should be its own topic, parentage presumptions and paternity proof. Just as a question, do Section 50 searches exist in other states? Yeah, they do. I think they're different forms in different states. They're not called Section 50 search certificates because that's referencing a legislation in New South Wales, but parentage certificates do exist in the ACT. I think Queensland, they'll do a letter that says we've got no entry. You just need some sort of paper document that's issued to make a statement. I've just done one in Victoria, which is a real headache. That was kind of, they called it like a letter of verification. So yeah, there are equivalents, but it's all, uniformity would be great, but unfortunately, but yeah, you will write and you will ask for a parentage search. You might be a bit of back and forth to understand how, so they understand what you want. But yeah, they do exist. So look, I mean, Tara, this is almost like a whole other subject, but so maybe, I don't know, maybe we should leave it there for questions. But yeah, the parentage, fathers, DNA, it's all a whole other interesting part of this story. So
yeah, thank you so much, Charlotte. I mean, I can just see how much knowledge you have on this and all the little nuances. So I definitely think, we've done enough to let people know who to contact if there is ever an issue on a matter. I've got a question that Joseph asked. So I think Joseph is an accountant. Let me know if that's not right, Joseph. Sort of saying, well, what are the other circumstances that a professional genie might be useful?
I guess it's going to be any situation where you need to prove somebody is related to somebody else, and that has some kind of implication, whether it's an entitlement or an ownership question. So it's identity, it's relationships, and it's tracing. So it's like, who are they and where are they now?
So it could be default beneficiaries in a trust deed or something.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah.
Definitely. Who through the passage of time, people just don't know where they are or who they are, or yeah, absolutely could come up. Life estates where people, they're looking for the remainder men from life estates that have been administered for decades, that sort of thing.
We have got a couple of other questions come through, but I have to wrap it up because I have to move on to the hot seat. Sorry. I just want to say Rosemary has put a testimonial in here for you as well, just saying how helpful it was for the matter that you helped her out. So I'll just put that up there so you get to see that beautiful feedback. The comments are in the chat. So if you do have more questions for Charlotte that we've run out of, you can always keep posting and we'll both see those. And if you're also watching this afterwards on a recording, then you can also put your question in as well, so that we can see it afterwards. Oh, Joseph, sorry, I thought you were an accountant, but you're a financial advisor. So yeah, if you're helping your clients with an estate planning matter, or hear that they're having problems with an estate admin or something, it is always useful to sort of remember that there are professionals who do this day in, day out, and how much value they can add. So I might wrap it up there. I just want to say, on behalf of everybody, Charlotte, thank you so much for your time today. I found that everything you shared today really fascinating. I've got some questions for you too that I might hold over or throw in the chat, but I've definitely learned a lot. And I mean, it's made me really realize how little I know about the whole process, but I've definitely learned a lot about what you go through and all of the considerations. So it really was fascinating. And I just want to say thank you so much. So we'll talk soon. Thank you everybody who joined. Sorry to talk over you. Well, thanks for everybody who joined. All right. Well, we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.